3 more breakfasts? The Archon asked first. 1 more for her. He nodded to Fenrina. Then 1 for me, and 1 for Astrid. They require separate meals? The Archon asked. Yeah, I call her a were-husky, but it's not really that. They're different people, different bodies, but also the same. He shrugged. And what about that womanizing dwarf? What do you mean he's wandering back up here? He was expressly forbidden to fraternize with the students. Evelinus spoke up. Yes, but you didn't say anything about the faculty. Steve pointed out and then shrugged. Would you prefer he try the diplomatic staff that stay in the village down below? As Evelinus mentally calculated the fallout from that scenario, Steve just shook his head. I thought not. Either way, vote of confidence aside, I am the best you've got for this. When reality is broke, I'm your guy. Head to Kavika, find monster or big evil bad guy, kill them, fix reality. Back before dinner. Steve shrugged. You need to be careful. Evelinus pointed at him. The situation there is already precarious considering all the increased traffic through the area, and people are on edge. Try to do your best not to create more chaos. I've already started 1 war, Steve replied with a scoff. What are the chances that I'll start a second? However, as Evelinus frowned and Steve went back to cooking, they both missed the slow smile that spread across the Archon's cosmic face. This place sure is bright, Fenrina said as she shielded her eyes a moment to look around the Estroko port city of Takesh. The buildings all around them were mostly made of a pinkish-red brick, and there were dozens of various multicolored tarps and sheets pulled out tight between them to provide shade between the twisting, winding streets. From the dock district where they stood, they could see the city winding up various levels of streets into the mountains that blocked the port in from the east. There were stalls set up everywhere. There seemed to be space with merchants both buying and selling all kinds of goods. Yeah, it is. He agreed for a moment and then scratched his chin. The streets look different since I was last here, but it's been a decade, so I shouldn't be surprised. How come there are 3 different types of buildings? Fenrina asked next as she pointed to some with slanted pink-red roofs but white-painted walls, then the more common flat-topped pink brick buildings, and finally some buildings that were built using as much colorful glass as possible that lit up in sparkling and dazzling ways in the bright midday sun. Estroko has a bit of a rocky history, Steve explained as he began to lead them through the streets. Basically, what we know as Estroko used to be 4 different kingdoms. Then invaders from deep Kavika nearly took all of the land until one of the northern kingdoms got their shit together and started a grand crusade against them and pushed them all back out. But this all took time, decades. Maybe a century, I forget. So between the original different kingdoms, the invaders, and random pockets of resistance in the mountains on both sides, there are a whole lot of cultures that call this place home. They mostly hold it all together with their mutual love of taking naps and eating dinner very, very late at night for no good reason. That and that goat bladder game, Sherry mentioned as she adjusted the blue shawl she had wrapped around her head and face. While she had taken on the appearance of a normal human, she was always careful about her appearance in especially religious countries. Not everyone thought as highly of demons as Steve did after all. Oh yeah, they kick around this inflated goat's bladder. I really don't understand the appeal. It's several hours of watching them kick something back and forth. Boring. But people over here can lose their shit over that game. He nodded. And then there's trade. See, they claim Estroko is the gateway to Kavika since it's in such a great place to harvest all the ivory. So ships stop to trade for ivory and they get all kinds of goods in return, and then trade those with more ships coming in from other places. So besides being held together by the Sultan, they're also held together by money. What's a sultan? Fenrina asked next as they wove in through the crowded streets as Steve led the way. Basically it's a king. The original king, through political shenanigans, made himself sultan of one of the invader places, and then used that to further grab more land? I don't really understand how it all works. I think he just did it so he could have a harem, which is the only real difference between a king and a sultan as far as I know, Steve explained. What's a harem? Fenrina asked next, and Steve sighed, deeply regretting his rambling mind in that moment. The most fun Larry Love has ever had, getting banned from an entire country. Ooh! Yee, the dwarf said as they walked. What? Fenrina asked in confusion, but then Steve coughed loudly and held out his hands as they got to an even more massive collection of market stalls set up in a large square surrounding a massive fountain. At the corners of the fountain were giant spires of multicolored glass that spread a rainbow of light all around the market. Welcome to the Grand Takesh Bazaar. Steve waved his hands around. If it could be bought and sold in the open, they were selling it here. Weapons, armor, spices, jewelry, gems, books, maps, charts. If it was easy enough to store and wave around in a market stall, it was being bought and sold. There were a few scattered patrols of guards in bright armor with gleaming Morian helms and wearing shawls of red, yellow, and green. But for the most part, the guards looked content to just slowly patrol and use their obvious bright colors as a deterrent alone. Likely as much to let criminals know to just stay away from the area as to give comfort to the merchants. But this isn't what we want, Steve said. Stick with me and try not to get lost. We're headed to the fountain. And beware of tricks they use to try and get you to their stall. Right, everyone? He looked back, and the other 3 members were all gone. Fuck! By the great northern bear! Look at them! Steve had to chase after Fenrina, who was shouldering people out of the way left and right as she followed something on the ground. When he got closer, he could see 2 dogs? But they were very small and looked a bit like fluffy potatoes with legs. Look at them. Steve, I need them. She continued to shoulder people left and right, making her way through the crowd as she followed the dogs. Finally, they scurried under the table at the front of a market stall with a smiling local. Ah, a potential customer. You have a great eye. You must be here for... But before he could continue, Fenrina had reached across the table to squish the man's face between her hands. I must buy your little furry potatoes! The merchant with the squished face looked at her in confusion, and then toward Steve before looking back at Fenrina. What? Was all he could manage with his face currently being squished. Your tiny walking furry potatoes! Give them to me! Fenrina demanded as she shook his head a little. Your dogs, Steve explained as the merchant's eyebrows arched up. Air aught or ale. The merchant tried to explain, but that just made Fenrina howl out. No! I need them! I will seriously die if I can't have them. They're so adorable and small and fluffy! Steve! She let go of the merchant's face to try and squeeze Steve's face, but he was expecting that and quickly ducked only for her to partially collapse against him, forcing him to try and catch the werehusky who was significantly larger than him. Steve! I need them! No, you don't! How would you take care of them? He grunted as he tried to keep her upright, as she pressed down across his shoulder like she was about to drop of exhaustion or death from lack of owning those dogs. I can walk them and feed them and clean up after them, she insisted. You can't even feed yourself and your room is a mess, Steve hissed back. No, I need them or I'll die, she insisted once more with a wail of sorrow. Such a drama queen, he gasped out as he tried to push her back upright, which was a significant strain until she straightened up on her own, which made him stagger a bit from the sudden lack of pushback. A queen? Oh, think they've got tiaras here? No, wait. Those are for princesses. I need a crown and a scepter that say drama queen. As the teenage werehusky began to look around for a place that sold jewelry, Steve instead grabbed her by the back of her armor. Oh, no, you don't. Quest first, shopping later. You know the rules. We don't buy things until after the quest, or else they can break during our fights. Besides, you don't get your allowance until the end of the quest either, he insisted. Ooh, come on! Fenrina gave him her sad, husky face again, and huffed a few times, trying to look cute and sad. But Steve just stared up at her with his hands on his hips until she finally sighed. Fine. But if there's a crown on the quest, can I have it? She asked and wagged her tail. If it fits, it's not cursed and the usual other rules. Steve nodded as she hopped a little with glee. Then he scanned the market, trying to spot where Sherry got off to. Fenrina, can you smell sherry? He asked. I can smell everything, she said after taking a sniff. Meaning? He asked with a frown. Meaning there is no chance I can sniff out only Sherry, she told him as he kept looking. Then he saw the bright blue shawl and sighed. Ah, shit. Follow me. Actually, better yet, you lead. He had Fenrina go first as she shouldered her way through the crowd once more, the various people getting shoved out of the way, turning to shout until they saw a massive, well-armored figure, and likely magical figure, so instead they wisely kept quiet. Soon, Steve had followed his tank through the crowd to where Sherry was sitting before a man with a set of paints and a scroll. So gorgeous! Most beautiful woman I have ever seen. I saw that blue shawl and I knew I had to paint you. It would be a sin before God, all gods, to leave your intense beauty off of my scroll, the man insisted. Sherry, we need to go, Steve said, but didn't make a move to grab her. He wasn't that stupid. Steve, please, I'm having my portrait painted. He saw me in the crowd and came over and… Well, he's certainly very appreciative of my beauty, unlike some people lately. She cast a glare at Steve. Yeah, about this. So you're telling me that you're painting my girlfriend for free? Steve asked, and the painter paused. The painter hesitated as Sherry frowned. Totally gratis, without any fees or payments of any kind. You're doing this out of the kindness of your heart or whatever other reason? Just because you feel like it, you're going to paint her portrait and it won't cost her a single coin? Steve pressed. Well, there would be a small fee, the painter finally admitted before Sherry stood up in a hurry and approached as she began to poke him in the chest. How dare you! You have no idea what sort of fury you're in for when you dare mess with a But before she could reveal she was a Sunderclaw, Steve tried to cover it up. Human! Steve coughed out into his hand. You're human! He coughed again. So Sherry held up and glared at the now fearful painter for a moment before simply turning and walking away without another word. The nerve of some parasites, Sherry growled out, then looked around. Where's Larry? She asked as if it were the dwarf's fault they had delayed in the market. Give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Steve paused and looked around. Huh, I guess. They could clearly hear a man yelling as there was a commotion off to their right, before Larry burst out of the crowd and dove behind Fenrina. She looked down at him, clutching to her legs before an angry dwarf in red, green, and yellow robes burst out with a loaf of battle bread in his hands. When he saw Larry, he pointed the bread at him and spoke out in Dwarvish. You dare touch the beard of my life mate! Steve narrowed his eyes for a moment as he inspected the dwarf before them. He was pretty sure it was a male dwarf, mostly. I was just complimenting their fine braid work, baby. You gotta let a fine piece of dwarf like that know how resplendent their beard is. If you don't, someone else might. Larry spoke back in Dwarvish. Fenrina had no idea what they were saying, but as she looked down between them, she pointed to the stranger. Hey, hi, go away. She made a shooing motion, and the dwarf finally looked up to realize who Larry was hiding behind. Touch their beard again, and I shall shave you, the possibly male dwarf said in common as he pointed to Larry and then backed into the crowd with a final dwarven, Fey! All right, are we all done derailing the quest? Steve asked as he looked around the party. "'Kay, let's go." He led the way once more towards the massive fountain in the center. As he got closer, he guided them to one of the giant glass spires at the corners. There was a strange air around the base of the tower. The air seemed to shimmer and shake a little. If someone watched carefully, they could see a few people walk into or out of nothingness, but none of the locals seemed surprised by this. There will be an odd feeling, but just follow me. It's totally safe, Steve insisted, and walked forward as the others followed him into the shimmering air. Despite the fact that their feet stayed on the ground, it felt like they were suddenly flipped upside down as their stomachs flip-flopped for a second. Then they were standing in the market again, looking out. But the sky was red, and a black crescent moon was high above, below them. Again, despite being firmly on the ground, there was a sensation as if they were up and the sky was beneath them somehow. All around there were magical races doing much as they had up above, buying and selling all manner of goods. But these were of a magic nature, and unlike the bored guards in bright armor, Steve pointed out posts on the buildings around them. Here the guards wore dark, matte black armor with red cloaks and were riding reddish-brown drakes. There were calls of all kind of mythical creatures being bought and sold, and more than a few large beasts flying through the sky. Yet still the glass spires around the fountain shone a brilliant array of colors all around the market. "Welcome to the Grand Takesh Bazaar," Steve waved. "If you can't find it up above, you can likely find it down here, but be on your best behavior. The guards here don't fuck around." "Is this what the Archon meant when she was talking about the threads of reality?" Fenrina asked. "No, this place is stable even if it's, what would I call this? It's not exactly a shadow realm. It's a local anomaly. I'll just call it that. There are magic anomalies all across Talaron that are more or less stable, but just different." He shrugged as he led them through the bazaar. "We're headed to an ivory dealer to get some info." "Isn't there a ton of ivory up above?" Fenrina asked as she looked all around as they walked, marveling at the various sights, sounds, and for her especially smells. "There are a variety of ivories. The kind we want is traded down here," Steve explained. He got to the edge of the market as he pointed to a building that had a giant dragon skull set on the roof right above the door. "I can't imagine the dragons take kindly to that sort of thing," Sherry mentioned. "Actually, they're fine with it. See, the reason this is all part of the Tusk Coast is there's a massive elephant, dragon, and assorted other large, terrifying animal graveyard not far from here. It's got some strange magic properties that draw in creatures near death in the above, and locals harvest their bones for the ivory trade. So everything you saw died of mostly natural causes, and the Draconic Council gets a cut from all the proceeds. Plus, it helps cut way down on necromancy when the bones are treated properly before selling," Steve explained. As they walked through the doors of the building, there were 2 more guards inside, silently watching them as they passed. Down here, the crested Morian helms were replaced with black lobster-tail helmets instead, and fitted with intricate faceplates that made it impossible to see the face of the guard wearing it. All around them were pieces of scrimshaw, unworked bones, and all variety of finished ivory pieces made of the more rare and powerful creatures of Talaron. At the center of the building was a somewhat small lizard man with 4 arms and chameleon-like eyes that kept moving in different directions. "Customers, come in, come in! Welcome, welcome!" "Well, if it isn't cut my own wrists, Ector. You've moved up in the world since you were selling little scrimshaw trinkets out by the stables," Steve said as he approached. The lizard man gave a nervous chuckle then as both eyes tried to focus on Steve now. "Aha, yes, I have my friend. But you seem to have me at a loss. Have we met?" The merchant seemed a bit nervous as Steve stepped up to his counter, but then Steve set something down before him which made him laugh. "Ah, one of my old ghostwood rings, very popular, very quality craftsmanship, very—" "Fake," Steve cut in. "It's not real ghostwood." Ector let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, come now. I'm sure you just took it to the wrong person for an examination. You see, humans can't trigger certain types of ghostwood because you need to be infused with—" Once more, Steve cut the merchant off. "Magic? Yes, I'm aware." He let that hang in the air as the lizard man looked him over for a bit and finally noticed the large book hanging from Steve's belt. You're that human!" He looked even more nervous now. "Yeah." Steve nodded slowly. "Yeah, I am. And I've got all the magic necessary to know that isn't real. Now I'm sure you've got nothing but real products now, but I remember your old slogan. If it isn't the finest quality real merchandise at the best prices, you'll cut your own wrists." Steve nodded slowly as the lizard man nervously rubbed his 4 hands together. "Ah, but as you can see from my wrists, I have no cut marks. I am an honest merchant," he insisted then. "That's the other trick, isn't it?" Steve said as he pulled a knife from his belt and set it on the counter before giving it a spin. "Because even if one were to say, 'Cut your entire hand off,' it would grow back, wouldn't it? Look, what is it you want? Don't tell anyone about the ring. I was young. I likely thought you were just a gullible human adventurer. How was I to know you really had the magic to use ghostwood? It was an oversight, and you know the secret of my wrists. And while it'll grow back, it does hurt a great deal. Are you looking for a refund? A discount?" The merchant took a rag from behind the counter to dab his suddenly sweaty forehead. What I want is information. I've been sent here to investigate the recent disappearances on both sides of the Great Boneyard. Someone has been making work crews disappear, but for some odd reason, I've heard your work crews aren't only fine, but you're bringing in record quantities of dragon bone, Steve said. Ah, this is misunderstanding. I hire the best work crews there are, seasoned adventurers all. There is nothing nefarious about this. With less competition, I bring in more. Simple. Hector tried to explain, but as his eyes kept darting around the room, Steve was far from convinced. I've been sent here on behalf of Orbitus. Steve explained then. How would you like if we had inspectors here day and night, or unday and unnight, watching everything you do over concerns that you're not properly warding your products? What interesting business practices might they find? To say nothing of making sure you're paying all of your taxes. Hector nervously rubbed the rag against his face once more to dab up the sweat. You don't understand. It's not my idea, he finally gasped. She showed up one day and told me I must obey her or she'd eat me. She's terrifying. She told me this is for everyone's good. I have no choice. Who is she? Steve asked, now that they were getting somewhere. I don't know for sure. I only know her as Duskmaw. When he said that, Steve froze for a moment. Do you know her? Hector asked when he saw Steve's reaction. Possibly. Steve tried to cover. Listen, if you know her, you know how powerful she is. Do us both a favor. Pretend you were never here. Pretend you know nothing. You can't defeat her. Hector pleaded, but Steve shook his head. No. I need to know everything you know about what's going on here. And while I can't defeat her alone, we can as a team, for we are Doom. Steve struck a pose as the lights flickered, and thunder roared outside from a bolt of reverse lightning, but Fenrina and Sherry just stood around looking confused, since they hadn't expected him to do that. We're expert adventurers, and there's nothing we can't handle. Trust me, we're professionals, he insisted. But as he did that, Fenrina looked around the shop. Where's Larry? She asked, just before Steve heard someone outside screaming in Nevesian Sandspeak. It was something touchwife? Steve sighed as Sherry and Fenrina headed outside. Steve pinched the bridge of his nose while Hector looked worried and anxious. Oh, for fuck's sake! There was some more shouting and a loud crash from outside. I'll be right back, but you will tell us everything, Steve insisted before turning to go join the others outside. However, even as he went to sort out whatever trouble Larry was in, he was worried about what he'd just heard. Could Duskmaw really be behind the trouble here? He didn't like the implications, but the reality of what he'd discover was very twisted and confusing indeed. However, it's also a tale for another time.